On the night of June 10th, a Russian-held port on the Sea of Azov went dark. Not metaphorically, literally. The lights cut out, the radar screens froze, the cranes stopped moving, and the fuel depots burned against a black sky. Within hours, Russian channels were quietly admitting that operational capacity had been significantly restricted. Ukrainian commanders were less diplomatic. They said the port was finished. The port was Mariupol. And that single sentence, written in 2026, would have been unthinkable in 2022. Because Mariupol is the city Vladimir Putin spent weeks reducing to rubble. The city he leveled street by street. The city he showcased to Russian television as the crown jewel of his special military operation. The city whose capture, he insisted, had secured the entire southern front. 4 years later, a few dozen drones undid all of it in a single night. But the surface story, drones hit a port stops working, is not the real story. The real story is who flew those drones, why they chose that target, and what their success reveals about a war that no longer obeys the rules Putin thought he was playing by. The unit that carried out the attack was the Azov Brigade. Hold that name for a moment, because it carries weight that no purely military description can capture. Azov is the formation that defended Mariupol to the last bullet in the spring of 2022. The fighters who held out for 82 days in the underground tunnels of the Azovstal steel plant, sheltering civilians, rationing water, broadcasting their final messages to a watching world before their ammunition ran out. They surrendered in May 2022. Russia paraded them as trophies. Some were tortured in captivity. Some never came home. The ones who did come home, through prisoner exchanges, one by one, did not retire. They reorganized. Ukraine elevated their brigade into a full corps, the first Azov Corps, and in the spring of 2026, that corps quietly began moving back toward the city it had lost. Not on foot, not in tanks, with drones. By April, Azov had seized air dominance over the highways feeding Mariupol. By May, Russian fuel tankers on the R-280 highway were being hunted systematically. And on June 10th, in coordination with Ukraine's SBU Alpha Special Operations Center and the newly formed Unmanned Systems Forces, the brigade that lost Mariupol returned to extinguish it. The symbolism is unmistakable, but the symbolism is also the smallest part of what happened. The operation was not a strike, it was a system collapse. Long-range kamikaze drones and FPV systems flew in at low altitude, threading beneath Russian radar coverage using autonomous navigation. Multiple drones converged on multiple targets simultaneously, overwhelming the Pantsir and Tor air defense batteries assigned to protect the port. Russia's better air defense systems had long since been pulled to the front lines. What remained at Mariupol was not built to absorb a saturation attack. Once the air defenses were saturated, the drones began carving out the port's nervous system, one organ at a time. Electrical substations and transformer stations, destroyed. The port went black. Radar and maritime surveillance systems, destroyed. The capacity to safely guide a ship into harbor, zero. Repair facilities and the port control tower, destroyed. Physical maintenance and operational coordination, collapsed. Fuel and lubricant depots, destroyed. 8 tanks had already been taken out in a strike 5 days earlier on June 5th. 9 more had been damaged. On the night of the 10th, the remainder were eliminated. And finally, a target with diplomatic weight. The dry cargo vessel Lady Augusta, a sanctioned ship belonging to Russia's Shadow Fleet, which had been ferrying stolen Ukrainian grain and metal out of occupied territories. She will not be ferrying anything else. 5 systems. 1 night. Here is why that matters. A port can survive one system failing. Lose your radar and ships dock more slowly. Lose your repair yard and damaged vessels limp elsewhere. Lose your fuel depot and anchored ships can't refuel. Any single blow slows a port down. It does not kill it. 5 blows together do. Without electricity, cranes don't lift, pumps don't pump, cooling systems don't cool. Without radar, ships can't enter safely. Without repair facilities, a damaged ship blocks the channel. Without fuel, anchored vessels can't leave. Without a control tower, no one is coordinating any of it. Each system depends on the others. Cut them simultaneously, and you don't get a degraded port. You get a dead one. The repair timeline tells the rest of the story. Electrical infrastructure of that scale takes months to rebuild. And during those months, even if every other system is intact, the port cannot function. Energy is the substrate. Without it, nothing else works. But the more important question is whether Russia will even get those months. Mariupol was not just a port. It was the keystone of Russia's southern logistics arch. Approximately 200,000 Russian soldiers are deployed across the Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson fronts. Their fuel, their ammunition, their spare parts, a significant portion was coordinated through Mariupol. The port was also the principal exit point for the stolen grain and metal that Russia has been laundering through its shadow fleet to fund the war. It mattered for one more reason. The R280 highway through Novoazovsk, the land corridor that was supposed to do what the port couldn't, was already broken. Ukrainian drone fire had reduced truck traffic on that road by 71%. Russia's own command had quietly banned military convoys on it. Mariupol port was the alternative that was supposed to relieve the pressure on the road. Now the alternative is gone. And the blow did not land in isolation. The same night the port went dark, Ukraine struck the ammunition depot of Russia's 51st Combined Arms Army in Kherson. Sea and land resupply for the southern front contracted simultaneously in a single coordinated evening. That is the direct military consequence. The economic consequence runs deeper and slower. As long as the port stays offline, the smuggling network that monetizes occupation contracts with it. The shadow fleet has fewer ports of call. The grain stays in silos. The metal stays in warehouses. The revenue stream that helps finance Russia's war shrinks. And the political consequence may be the sharpest of all. In 2022, the Kremlin sold Mariupol's capture as one of the war's defining victories. Mariupol is secured was a load-bearing pillar of the domestic narrative. The admission that the port's capacity is now significantly restricted, forced out of Russian officials within hours of the strike, punctures that pillar in front of a domestic audience that is heading toward autumn Duma elections. If Mariupol is not safe, then nothing Putin captured is safe. Follow the consequences one layer further, and you arrive at the peninsula. Between 40,000 and 60,000 Russian soldiers are stationed in Crimea. Their resupply options have been narrowing for over a year. The Chongar Bridge has been struck twice and closed. The Henichesk-Arabat crossing has been disabled. Gasoline sales on the peninsula have been rationed. The last railway ferry, Slavyanin, was destroyed. The rail line was cut. Mariupol port was the last major Sea of Azov alternative through which Crimea could still be fed. The Kerch Bridge remains standing, but its capacity is limited, and it cannot move fuel at the volumes the garrison requires. With Mariupol offline, the Crimea garrison's lifeline is reduced to a handful of secondary roads and a bridge that was never designed to carry an army. This is no longer an attack on a port. It is the methodical isolation of an occupied peninsula. And the framework for that isolation has a name. Retired U.S. Army Europe Commander Lieutenant General Ben Hodges described the three phases as isolate, make unsustainable, enter. Ukraine has largely completed the first phase. It is well into the second. The objective is not an amphibious assault on Crimea. The objective is to turn Crimea into a burden Russia can no longer afford to carry. Step back, and the Mariupol strike resolves into something larger than a single operation. It is the maturation of a doctrine that Ukraine has been building for 4 years. In 2022, Ukraine fought Russia conventionally at the front, with the tools it had. In 2023, it demonstrated deep strike capacity by hitting the Kerch Bridge. But isolated blows did not produce lasting results. In 2024, it transformed naval warfare by destroying roughly a third of Russia's Black Sea fleet with sea drones. In 2025, medium-range strike drones moved into mass production. In 2026, all of these capabilities converged into a single integrated strategy. It has a name in Ukrainian planning documents, and the name is honest about its purpose: logistics strangulation. The strategy operates on three layers, and the layers reinforce each other. The first layer is deep strike. Systematic destruction of targets 30 to 300 kilometers behind the front line. Refineries, fuel depots, rail junctions, bridges, and ports. Mariupol is the most recent application. The second layer is sea control. Degrading the Black Sea Fleet with naval drones, keeping the Kerch Bridge under pressure, and rendering Sea of Azov ports inoperable. The destruction of the Slavyanin ferry belongs to this layer. The third layer is land corridor constriction, bringing the R280 under fire control, hitting the Chongar and Arabat bridges, and progressively isolating the Crimea garrison. The three layers multiply each other. When the port closes, the land corridor gets more pressure. When the corridor is cut, the sea route matters more. When the sea route is closed, the system unravels. And the cost ratio is the most uncomfortable detail of all. The logistics lockdown program that Defense Minister Mikhailo Fedorov announced on May 27th has a total budget of $113 million. A fraction of what Putin spent in 2022 simply to take Mariupol the first time. Fedorov's formulation is blunt. The enemy will no longer feel safe, even far from the front. Mariupol is 80 kilometers behind the lines. It is no longer safe. None of this means the southern front has collapsed. Russia's capacity to adapt under pressure has been demonstrated repeatedly across this war. In 2022, when Ukraine cut the Dnipro bridges around Kherson, Russia improvised with pontoon crossings and night convoys, sustaining its forces for months before executing a controlled withdrawal in November. A similar adaptation cycle could begin in Mariupol. Mobile generators could restore partial power. The physical structures of the port are still standing. What was destroyed was infrastructure, not buildings. Berdyansk could absorb some of the displaced traffic. The Kerch Bridge remains open for personnel and light cargo. Air resupply through Simferopol Airport, IL-76 and AN-24 transports can move materials in. But every one of these workarounds has a ceiling. An IL-76 carries 40 to 50 tons and can manage only a few sorties a day. Set that against the daily needs of a 200,000 soldier front, and the numbers stop being relevant. At Stalingrad, the Luftwaffe tried to sustain the 6th Army by air. The arithmetic did not work then either. Russia's allies extend the equation but do not solve it. China continues to supply microchips, machine tools, and industrial components that keep Russian war production functional. North Korea provides ammunition and manpower. Iran shares drone technology. This network raises the threshold at which the Russian war economy would collapse outright. But none of those allies sends port engineers. None of them dispatches infrastructure repair crews into the range of Ukrainian drones. Rebuilding what Ukraine destroyed in Mariupol is Russia's problem alone. And Russia currently lacks the capacity to repair both its front lines and its rear simultaneously. The real question is not whether Russia can repair Mariupol, it is whether Ukraine will let the repair finish. The pattern of this war is unambiguous. The Kerch Bridge was repaired in 2023. Ukraine struck it again. The Chongar Bridge was repaired. 2 days later, it was closed again. Fuel tanks at Mariupol were hit on June 5th. While Russia was still cataloging the damage, the rest were destroyed on June 10th. In this cycle, the defender pays millions of dollars for each round of repairs. The attacker takes the same infrastructure offline again, with drones that cost a few tens of thousands of dollars each. The cost ratio favors Ukraine, and the longer the cycle runs, the wider the gap becomes. This is not just Mariupol's story. It is the architecture of the war itself. Putin took Mariupol port in 2022 with conventional force. Weeks of bombardment, thousands of casualties on both sides, the destruction of a city. Ukraine extinguished the same port in 2026 with a few dozen drones, in a single night with 0 casualties on its side. The difference is not just method, it is the changing nature of war. A target you captured with weeks of conventional operations can be lost in a single night in the drone age. The equation does not apply only to Mariupol. It applies to every piece of infrastructure Russia holds in occupation, Every bridge, every depot, every refinery, every airbase. The old rule was that whoever holds the ground holds the asset. The new rule is that whoever holds the drones decides whether the asset still functions. Putin understood that ports are the heart of logistics. He could not protect that heart because the rules of war shifted under him, and Ukraine learned the new rules first. Mariupol port has now died twice in 4 years. The first time, Russia killed it to take it. The second time, Ukraine killed it to deny it. Between the two deaths lies the entire transformation of modern warfare, from mass and territory to precision and reach, from holding ground to denying its utility. What feeds an army is not the soldier at the front. It is the logistics reaching that soldier. And the logistics that once required a fleet to interdict now sits within range of a swarm that costs less than a single tank. The question that hangs over the rest of this war is not whether Russia can repair Mariupol. It is whether any infrastructure, anywhere in occupied Ukraine, or eventually anywhere within Ukrainian drone reach, can still be considered safe. If the answer is no, the calculus of the entire war shifts. And if the calculus shifts, so does the calculus of every future war that watches this one and takes notes. Putin secured Mariupol in 2022. Ukraine unsecured it in 2026. The next question is which port, which bridge, which depot is next, and whether anyone in Moscow has an answer that does not depend on hoping the drones run out before the targets do.